Electoral Commission is set to open a public dialogue on the viability of electronic voting in South Africa. This was revealed at the three-day e-voting conference in Cape Town this past week. Well, joining us now to elaborate a bit more on this is Michael Atkins, an elections analyst. Michael, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. It is usual that at the end of each and every election, the parties that would normally not perform well would complain about the voting process and the mechanics thereof. This time around, we saw even the parties that did well, like the MK party, complaining about glitches in the system. Does that kind of reaction warrant us to open up this debate about electronic voting?
Hi, good afternoon. Yes, look, it's a good conversation to have, but I don't think that the particular complaints from some of the parties are the main driver of this process. One of the mandates of the IEC is to research electoral technology. They have investigated this in the past, and it's really part of their job description to look at trends happening around the world and assess the viability in South Africa. So no, I wouldn't link it to the particular situations in this past election.
Would it help, though, with electoral fraud? Maybe that's the question.
Well, there's different kinds of electoral fraud. So electronic voting, and again, there are different forms of electronic voting or counting, would help with certain aspects of fraud, but not all. But the problem is, it introduces the new types of fraud that might be possible. So although they were never substantiated in any court case, there were many claims in the 2020 US election of fraud involving voting machines. So it's not one or the other. It certainly improves the efficiency of counting, which is a big deal. But yes, there's a lot of factors to consider.
Yeah. So one of those factors is, for example, huge voter turnout, which maybe others would say the past election would have been a challenge for the IEC, where in some instances they would have had to ask those officials who otherwise would have come later to come in early because of just the huge number of people that would have been there. Would an option in the South African context to be able to vote electronically make a huge difference when we are considering questions of access, for example, to such devices and technology?
Okay, there's two very different styles that you can consider electronically. One is using machines in the voting stations where people still go as normal. The second type, which is actually it's almost a separate question, is whether people can vote via the internet. Now, that is a separate question, and although the IEC is doing the research and is opening the discussions, my understanding is that they are not seriously pursuing the idea of internet-based voting, although it might be an interesting option for overseas voters, for example. But in terms of the logistics of our elections and the numbers of voters, no, there isn't an immediate prospect that, like internet voting, would then take the burden off the voting station.
Yeah. The extent of voter education that this would require, I mean, just this past election, we were dealing with, for example, a new scenario now where you have independent voters, and to understand that particular process also took some serious voter education. We're still not sure whether everybody understood how it was actually going to work. Now, when you have that added challenge maybe, or maybe that added advancement, if you want to call it that, of electronic voting, would that pose a challenge?
Look, certainly education and ongoing education is an enormous challenge, and I think the IEC does incredible work with limited resources. So any changes are going to require education, but I don't think we should underestimate our voters. Everybody has used an ATM. Most people have used phones, and a lot of us have used smartphones. So it's not such a strange idea, for example, that you might have a touchscreen booth where you choose your party, and some systems then print out a ballot straight away, which you can then check as correct, and you also submit the paper one. So I don't think those challenges are too difficult, but obviously it would be a factor that would be considered in the planning.
In your view, I mean, with the various challenges that we would have, for example, around electricity and around connectivity, would this be a viable option, e-voting?
Yes, it is a good question. So connectivity is less of an issue, but that's because of security. If you have voting machines in the voting station, those machines cannot be connected to the internet at that point, because then that is a security risk. We wouldn't know if somebody from a country in Eastern Europe or the Far East or somewhere, or even elsewhere in Africa, were coming in and controlling that process. So those machines have to be standalone. But yes, the electricity supply is an important question. But obviously, there are people who know a lot more about those things than I do. But you're correct. That question would need to be answered satisfactorily for us to be able to consider this.
Looking at countries that have introduced electronic voting, including countries that are using poll site technology, internet voting, and so on and so forth, have they derived any value from putting those systems in place?
Look, there's clear value. In simple terms, the results come through quickly, right? Which is a benefit, but that's not an absolute problem. We must be clear, we don't have to go to electronic voting. We should be discussing it, and I think the IEC is going about this in the perfect way of opening up the discussion, getting expert reports, getting people together to share perspectives from every discipline. But a lot of it comes around, yes, the accuracy of the counting and the speed of the counting are clear benefits, providing that you can ensure the security of the process, that there's no software things, either errors or malware that goes into those machines and alters the tally without anyone knowing.
Yeah.
But these are the questions. And just to mention, the conference is happening this coming week, Monday to Wednesday in Cape Town. So hopefully we will get a lot more information and detail through those 3 days.
Yeah, let's indicate and highlight once again that this is a conference really to reflect on the possibilities. Does not mean that we are going the e-voting way, but certainly to gather information, as you put it, from experts, from the deaf and blind communities, from the general public, from academia, and everybody to come in. And I suppose out of this, there's going to come some kind of document and analysis of the viability of this.
Yes, and as I say, the IEC is fulfilling their mandate extremely well in this regard. They are preparing the research, they are gathering the right people, they're having the conversations, but the decision might well be not now. Perhaps some point at the later, and we will have learned a great deal in the process, even if there's no clear decision to move forward.
Michael Atkins, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on, Elections Analyst there. Michael Atkins.